Hello, I'm Scott Sklar, your professor here at GW's Technologies. This segment is to discuss resiliency, covering failures of existing types of infrastructure, pipelines, dealing with energy waste from coal, nuclear, natural gas, oil sludge, dealing with health, transportation, buildings, and transportation support. Um, and we're going to go on a little journey to give you some more detail. So, I want to remind you that the Earth population has been growing. I mentioned earlier, when I was born in 1950, we had 2.5 billion people. We're over 8. And in fact, in October of 2022, it was announced that the world had just crossed the 8 billion mark, and here's the statistics slide on that. It's pretty astounding for one person like me to have lived in one lifetime and see 5.5 billion plus on the planet. And this is as important um, that to take a look at how much of the world is urbanized share of the population. So, and so 1950, when I was born, uh, a very small percent of 14% of Africa was urbanized, 17% of Asia, half of Europe, under half of Latin America, and about two-thirds of North America. And now almost the entire world is at over 50%. And in fact, North America, Latin America, and Europe are three quarters, Asia is half, and Africa is approaching half. And you have to understand that when you move from rural to urban, uh, the amount of infrastructure you need is profoundly greater, and therefore your pollution and greenhouse gas emissions follow that. So, if the water infrastructure dies in a rural country, let's go back to Africa, 14.3% were urbanized, which means 85.7 were not. That 85.7 could go to the stream or the lake and with a pail and get their water. Or if the sewer system didn't work, they'd go in the field or the forest and pee. But when you're urbanized, you really can't do that. So the need for infrastructure and resilient infrastructure is profound. Uh, the United States has experienced a substantial increase in energy consumption over time, population growth and technological advancements, moving from wood to coal to oil to natural gas and now renewables. So the issues change and the resiliency issues change. So this is a 2021, a great article on the risk to critical infrastructure and particularly relating to cybersecurity because now all our infrastructure has some form, usually not enough, of web enablement, sensors, and controls. And that makes it not only impervious to attack, but sometimes giving us faulty information as well. So we have old infrastructure, we have a web enabled infrastructure, but in its teenage years, really. Um, so these are the list of the biggest blackouts in U.S. history. Um, and give you a sense of what's going on. And most of them are pretty recent. I mean, Hurricane George is not, and Hugo, but everything else is after the year 2000. And it's showing that both intense weather and patterns, many of which are driven by climate and aging infrastructure, and this cybersecurity threat all are intertwined. Um, this I put in is infrastructure funding by region, and basically, you see the the issues of who's funding what, but the whole point is This is external funding for what's going into Africa now, but it gives you the sense that the whole world, if they want to sell things and build export markets, they have to build infrastructure for those countries that need it. So let's walk around the issue. This is actually a great article in the New York Times. Leonhardt is a great writer, and looking at climate overall and why do we continue moving in places that we know are going to be battered by hurricanes or get ocean surges or get flooding, and what makes us not prepare. I think that's an interesting concept. Of course, we were not prepared for terrorism either in the Twin Towers. I remember the event like it was yesterday. It was almost unbelievable that uh, terrorists from Afghanistan could plot something right in our biggest city in the United States of America. Uh, we are also getting buffeted by remnants of climate change, and or the oncoming of climate change might be a better term. And look at tropical cyclones, which are hurricanes, do the most damage here. And droughts number two, and there it is. And severe storms as well, more frequent, of course. But we have lots of issues, and they're going to continue to get worse. This is the best chart I can find on what causes power outages. I don't agree with everything in it, but it is pretty close. Wind and rain. Equipment failure is the biggest, actually. Wind and rain, half of that. Lightning, human error, voluntary and voltage reductions, cold weather, supply shortages, meaning they just don't have enough gas or heavy oil to power, ice storms, fires. They don't have animals, and we'll get to that here too, which is a big player. Improve it. So this is my best picture of human error in the electric grid. This was 14th August 2003, and this was, by the way, right the day after my daughter was born. And a tree limb fell in Ohio and knocked out 8 states and parts of Canada from 3 days to 3 weeks. And it was a tree that fell outside the power plant property, and the managers didn't handle it properly, and it caused a cascading event. We first actually blamed it on Canada, which was incredulous, and finally found the culprit. So here we are. And it affected 10 million people, and in the U.S. in 8 U.S. states and Ontario, and 10 million people in Ontario, 45 million people in 8 U.S. states. So a very big blackout, and it created Congress to set up a mandatory nonprofit manned by utilities that was to deal with these kind of problems and better coordinate, so you wouldn't have these cascading events going outside of certain utilities. So this is, most states could see earthquakes. Now, earthquakes are not climate related, they're geological. But look where they are. Obviously we know about California, Alaska, but we have some along the Mississippi. You see some sort of dark areas in Virginia and South Carolina. So we have areas that heretofore had not been experiencing tremors and actual earthquakes, and we need to be ready for it. Nuclear power plants. Water stress threatens half of the world's thermal power plant capacity. If you don't have enough water to use and cool, you can't have thermal power. So this is a Texas chemical plant that caught fire by EPA. It really does petrochemicals. But why I put this here is we're not just talking about energy infrastructure. We're talking about, in this case, uh, chemical infrastructure, manufacturing. And it is also not very resilient because most of our chemical plants, frankly, are very old. This is Hurricane Katrina coming in, and this was one of our biggest superstorms. Definitely climate change. Basically took down the grids in Louisiana and Mississippi. I worked for the governor of Mississippi and the city council of New Orleans during that time, dropping hybrid renewable battery systems at intersection signal lights so we can get emergency vehicles through, at municipal pipeline pumps because they were washed out to the Gulf of Mexico and people needed water. And the whole system needed pipeline water pressure if you're going to start up the power plants. And then I did hospitals and even doctor office cold chain vaccine refrigerators and in drugstores too. And then lastly, cell towers for communication. So those are the big four that I spent most of my time on. And by the way, when Hurricane Ida went through Louisiana and brought down their entire grid over a year ago, I was called up and asked if my systems there are still working, and they absolutely were. Um, this is waste from industry we're going to talk about. This is uranium contaminated property on the Detroit River. And a lot of these waste areas are breaking down. Our storage facilities are old infrastructure. You may remember a coal ash was behind a dam in Tennessee that broke, and something like 15 football fields of coal ash spread out into communities. Um, this is Duke Energy shutting down its 1,800 megawatt Brunswick nuclear power plant in North Carolina because of heavy rainfall. And so nuclear power plants get shut down for freezes because their water pumps freeze. They must have water movement. And sometimes too much water overwhelms its screens on the intake to bring in water as well from usually the river. This is a failure in a power plant, actually a big giant transformer, and it colored the sky blue. And again, we have very old infrastructure. And by the way, most of our transformers, like 95%, are made either in Taiwan or South Korea, few in Japan. Uh, and now we're realizing that that's not acceptable. It leaves us in the lurch when we get these more horrendous unplanned situations. And now, of course, the Western world is helping Ukraine, sustain its grid during the Russian war here, and that puts them either further out. So we're trying to. It is government policy to now create manufacturing for transformers and force utilities and regional power authorities to store transformers to anticipate damage and loss. Maps of that all over the world of where it's more on the grid. So this is another warning on domestic extremists on the power. Um, this is a 2022 article looking at domestic terrorist attacks on the power grid. Um, and this alert went out in 2013 of sniper attacks in Pacific Gas and Electric substations. And 2015, Congress directed the creation of a strategic reserve for critical power systems equipment. By the way, most of our transformers that regulate the power, electric power, are made in Taiwan and South Korea. About a 2-year delay here in the United States. And now the Ukraine war, a lot of the Western world is putting their extra transformers to help them rebuild their grids under the Russian attack. So, we're starting to build a small domestic industry, and we're also issuing requirements that electric utilities and regional transmission authorities require storing backup transformers for long periods of time. Domestic extremists have plotted to disrupt the power grid. Department of Homeland Security warns in 2022, Department of Justice charged 4 suspected racially motivated domestic violent extremists who were plotting to hurt the power grid. And the U.S. electric grid contains 7,700 power plants, 3,300 utilities, 2.7 million miles of power lines. So that's the system. And it's very hard to protect that entire system all the time. So many of us, like this professor, are saying we need to make it a more distributed system, more on-site generation at the cell tower, at the substation, more distributed along power lines. And humans. I showed you again that satellite photo of human error at a tree. This is an internet intentional attack. Thousands without heat in frigid Colorado, 2020. Thousands of residents without heat in frigid Aspen, Colorado, after gas service lines were intentionally damaged over the weekend. So there we go. Data breach. Texas man arrested for plot to bomb Amazon data center in Ashburn, Virginia. By the way, Loudoun County has more data centers than almost anywhere on earth here in Virginia. So, and by the way, in the United States, data centers are in generic geographic areas. So, Wisconsin, Utah, California, Loudoun County, Virginia, Prince George's County. I mean, so there are fields and fields of these giant buildings. They are not particularly protected well either. So, Duke Energy was fined in the Southeast here $10 million by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation for security violations between 2015 and 2018 regarding critical infrastructure assets, 127 security violations, mostly cyber assets, process deficiencies, inadequate training, lack of internal controls. So this was to show an example that you're going to be prosecuted if you don't get your act together. So this is a great article of 2014. Report warns flooding from storm surge could threaten the Washington, D.C. infrastructure. This article out of the Washington Post has great maps of the mall being flooded in 8 feet of water, and Joint Base Anacostia. We have a lot of military bases around Washington. We are actually and of course we have the Potomac River right through here, and Anacostia River. We have a lot of stuff going on that makes us quite vulnerable on infrastructure. I love this one. I was living in Washington, D.C. in 2013, and this WTOP, the radio network, Frederick Douglass Bridge, one of the big rivers. We have bridges over the Potomac and Anacostia River, and it was stuck open. It was a drawbridge because of the power outage, and lasts for several hours. Power outages in Washington, D.C. release raw sewage. This is also interesting. Here, the sewage treatment plant on the Potomac River, in the middle of the night, after midnight, took down and took apart its big backup diesel engines. These are giant. These are like 3-story tall generators to service them, thinking there'll never be an outage because who uses electricity, at 1 a.m. in the morning? And a 69,000 volt power line to the facility failed, and they didn't have their backup generators. And 17 million gallons of sewage in the middle of downtown D.C. lasted that smell for almost a month. It was horrible. So this is 2024, more current, and this Texas grid holds through frigid temperatures. So they had to do some conservation calls where they go to industry and say, don't do your big industrial processes. We can't have as much electric draw. So voluntary reductions are great. 2021 was when the winter storm Uri caused most of the state to black out, and they didn't want to go through that again. So, uh, better internet and controls, better establishing conservation efforts, uh, more renewables that were not as threatened. And it was interesting in the 2021 outage, um, wind turbines got blamed, and wind blows mostly at night, so that's not when the outage occurred. So it didn't. So some wind turbines did not work, but some did. I have wind turbines working in Antarctica and in Greenland, but but it was really the pipeline pumps and the nuclear power water pumps. And this continues on that Texas demand of electricity is growing rapidly. Energy investment in energy efficiency and demand response is needed. And it talks about what's needed here. So, at the front lines in Texas, California, Louisiana, of what I call the climate onslaught, but it impacts every single state grid. The natural gas lines. So this is a great article, 2024. U.S. grid vulnerable to power outages due to its reliance on gas. And natural gas plant failures were the main factor behind electricity shortfalls and outages during major winter storms in the U.S. since 2011. And the risk remains high. Natural gas plants that replace coal to become the largest source of electricity for the U.S. power grid, but they appear to be the weakest link during weather. It's true. So it's a huge amount of infrastructure. You got gas wells, you got gas tanks, you got gas lines, and then you got gas generation plants. And each of them have soft spots in not only weather but terrorism. This is a natural gas explosion in 2010 in San Bruno, California, and had significant repercussions for not only the Pacific Gas and Electric, one of the nation's largest utility companies, but the gas industry for sure. This is injecting wastewater, and we call that fracking. Hydraulic fracturing is to take water and at very high pressure with grit and chemicals, crack rock that has droplets of oil or bubbles of natural gas in them. Mostly this is called shale, not all. And we have that start in western Pennsylvania and goes all the way down into Texas and Oklahoma, but all over the country. And the problem is, when we keep doing that, more and more of the rock is fracturing. And I want you to think of a glass on a window pane, and you've seen a rock hit it, and you have all those little spider cracks in it. That's what we're doing in the rock to release the oil droplets or the gas droplets. And then we bring it up, and then that wastewater, which, by the way, has gone into the ground and is somewhat radioactive and has different substances that are not good for human beings, and we have to, and by fracturing that rock, we are causing earthquakes. And I have a whole. This was our worst cyber attack in energy in history. This was the Colonial Pipeline, our longest natural gas pipeline, millions of gallons of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. And so this is staggering. And this was just a few years ago. And so, and it goes all the way from New York to Texas. And this was unbelievable. So I would like you to read this. The various levels of government, including the FBI and the White House, are aware of the attack, are aiding Colonial Pipeline, understanding the pipeline is vital to the area's transportation needs. By the way, one of the most populated areas in the United States. And so there we go. This was the nation's largest pipeline cyber attack. Pipelines, 3 major spills in 7 years. Keystone has leaked far more than the TransCanada has estimated. That's true. So there it goes. I mean, these pipeline attack on Colonial. This is a ransomware attack. This is also on Colonial. This is living near fracking wells is limited to higher rate of heart attacks and immune deficiency diseases. And we guess where we have fracking, Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Oklahoma, Texas, California, and up to the Midwest. Um, and we have some big problems as a result of that. This is the Trans Canadian Pipeline explosion in West Virginia. And there it goes in an article you can read about it. Here's the Enbridge pipeline in Ohio exploding. Here's Harvey County, Kansas, the pipeline exploding. I have about 80 pictures of pipelines exploding. I don't want to bore you to death. Ransomware shuts gas compressor for 2 days. So this is another attack, not on the Colonial Pipeline, but shows again these pipelines are hostage to cybersecurity programs. Here is a gas pipeline ruptures in Mississippi. 300 people had to evacuate. The gas is explosive. So you have not only to deal with the mess of the pipeline, you have the mess of public safety, nuclear power plants. We already talked about water, climate risk. Heat wave forces France to shut down 4 nuclear power plants. We're getting hotter weather. Remember, why do you have to shut down a nuclear power plant because of extremely hot weather? Because you got to cool the superheated water. And if you don't do that, you're in a lot of danger. So Europe has done it more than anywhere else, but so has China, and we are beginning to do it now. This is below freezing temps in the Massachusetts Salem nuclear reactor, Delaware River. Give you a sense on that. So, Salem Unit 1 reduced the power to 88%, and so PSEG is seeking $300 million in ratepayer subsidies to keep the Salem plants open, which is not going to happen. Nuclear Regulatory Commission IG also warns of fraudulent parts in U.S. power plants, which pose a safety risk. So not only are there cyber threats, but also not good management to make sure you can verify. And again, nuclear power plants run much hotter. Of course, they have nuclear uranium and nuclear waste near them. So the issues are much more severe for failure, let's say, than a natural gas plant, which just goes boom. Hackers breach a U.S. nuclear power plant network, could be in danger. It's 2017. Pilgrim nuclear power plant was removed from service on Thursday. Winter storm buffeted region, forcing grid operators. This is the regional interstate operator in New England to turn to power imports from other electric supplies, which is climate and water stress. We're going to cover this a little later here in the climate segment, but economic damage as well. So this was 2014 article, how a polar vortex almost killed the grid. And this is from the American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, which is the entity that was created from that event that shut down, that big blackout that shut down 8 states and Ontario, and because of ultra cold temperatures. Now, by the way, I joked one time that these weather people make up all these names, and I'm hearing polar vortexes all the time. But I was finally told by climate scientists that actually they aren't making it up. We never had polar vortexes come below the Canadian border. This is a direct result of climate change. And so now we get these super cold Arctic air blasts. And this particular one was the coldest in 17 years, fell 20 to 30 degrees below the norm, essentially overnight. Record demands for electricity and natural gas to fuel power plants, sub-freezing temperatures, basically took down generating equipment, power lines snapped, and again, pipeline pumps froze for natural gas and water pumps for nuclear power plants. So demand increased, record in this case 559,000 megawatts, exceeding the previous peak by 3%. And we're seeing these polar vortexes more and more since 2014. So, and again, Texas went down as well from pretty much the same thing. So, we are, our infrastructure is really not prepared for the changing environment of cybersecurity, terrorism, extreme cold and extreme heat, and then water, uh, flooding, surges, and high winds and hurricanes. It's high. Federal bank regulator proposes first climate risk guidance. The Office of Controller of the Currency for ecological and human disaster. 126 million people were in a heat alert. And so, and this was August 2023. Half of the U.S. population, well, maybe more honest, a third. Okay, I'll let it go. But still, huge amount of people in the country. So there we go. And heat's going to be a huge problem. Because it overtaxes the power lines. It causes transformers to blow up. And in many cases, you have to shut down certain kinds of power plants. And electric transmission lines, the high voltage lines, sag in extreme heat. And some of them catch fire, which California has experienced. This is negative. So, and then we have these Superfund sites where they have been badly polluted and we have stabilized the pollution. Well, that doesn't work if you have storm surges or hurricanes or wildfires going through them. And then you can get these horrible pollutants that we've stabilized and stored back out. And Puerto Rico had to face that head on. They actually put coal ash into their landfills at a few years before, was recent. And experts had warned, well, if you have a flood or a big hurricane, that coal ash could come right out. It's closer to the top, and that's exactly what happened. Matter here. As climate risks mount, the insurance safety net is collapsing. Several large insurance companies have backed out in Florida, South and North Carolina, California, Oregon. We're beginning to see it. If you can't get insurance, how do you get a mortgage on your business or for your home? And so these things are really threatening the way we live. Preparedness, climate change has toppled civilizations. Why? So new research published in a peer-reviewed Biological Science, Royal Society last month suggests that resiliency is an ability that societies can gain and lose over time. Research has found that a stable society can withstand even a dramatic climate shock, whereas a small shock can lead to chaos and vulnerable one. So how we plan for the future, which we'll discuss in the following courses, really. This is looking at wildfires. This is out of C2ES, and it's looking at all regions of the United States are going up, but then they do it regionally to give you a sense of who is. The Rocky Mountains, way more than the Northern Plains, the warm deserts way more. So this gives you a sense of the western part of the United States that has higher heat that we already talked about. Oil wells and refineries, we looked at that. Those are the pipelines in the Gulf. This is recently, 2024. This is an article on the Houthis shooting cargo ships and oil tankers. And so we are bombing them right now to make sure that open access in the Middle East is around. And of course, it's creating supply chain issues because 20% now of what went through is now going around Africa or through the Panama Canal or around South America rather than being shot at by a missile by the Houthis. This is a train spill, 230,000 gallons in an Iowa river of crude oil. So we also move heavy oils by train, not just pipeline, and by truck. And we've had major disasters. This is an explosion at the Husky Energy Refinery in Superior, Wisconsin, 6 years ago, major one. Explosion at a huge Louisiana refinery, 2022. There's another one. Here's a Texas chemical plant and refinery in 2019 exploding. This is actually a death at an oil well in Chesapeake Energy oil well. This is we have coal plants have coal ash, and coal ash is stored. Of course, all electric plants are near water, mostly in coal plants near rivers. So the coal ash is near the river, and they're contaminating groundwater with toxins. And within the coal ash are heavy metals, some radioactive materials. They're immune disruptors, and they're carcinogens, and they're hormone suppressors. And they're actually horrible for particularly young children and older people, but horrible for all of us. Animals. I can do again a whole slideshow on this, but squirrel power. A squirrel that electrocuted itself on a power line in Tampa, Florida. 200 customers. Squirrel cut regional power at the regional airport in Virginia. Portland, Oregon, 9,200 customers on July 23rd, and 7,400 customers July 26th. In out of power in Kentucky, 10,000 people lost power to separate squirrel incidents. Squirrels are a big problem. I cannot tell you if they're hired by Putin. I do not know, but they cause more trouble than you think. We had an outage, couple of different outages at different times at the New York Stock Exchange, explicitly tied to squirrels. And it's in this article. Internet data centers, critical infrastructure ransomware are becoming more frequent, and also ransomware to the electric grid that's feeding these data centers. Again, we covered. This is the military data breach at the Pentagon, and this was 2020. So even the Pentagon, one of the most secure buildings on this planet, had a centers. Ransom shutdown, pipeline. These are unidentified hackers that breached a U.S. nuclear power plant, 2017. Israel says hackers targeted the control system. That's what a SCADA system is for its water facilities. Where do we go from here? Well, I love this. This is Puerto Rico and looking at the Caribbean. This actually is a solar farm. That went through a hurricane event. It's actually at the northmost coast of the island, and so the modules do great. And so you're seeing photovoltaics real time in the Caribbean go up, and so this Caribbean installation was done by a Greek company, because they've done a lot in Greece, and so I thought that was pretty cool. So this slide is microgrids. I want to talk about what a microgrid is. A microgrid, and we're going to get deeper into this. We're going to have a whole segment on microgrids in the classes after this, but these are blends of renewable energy technology, energy storage. Some also have natural gas and diesel turbines that are on site anyway, and they integrate together with smart controls, and they can seamlessly detach from the grid and power what they're supposed to. Buildings, a campus, a community, or critical infrastructure, and then when the grid stabilizes, seamlessly go back. So this really talks about how you deal with that. And in this article, uh, they're talking about 14 states were under some sort of heat advisory. Temperatures tied or broke records in California, Texas, Florida, Death Valley, Phoenix. And this is talking about how microgrids are being used to stabilize communities and campuses in these states. Okay, so we're going to talk about how we handle resiliency in technology, and obviously, most people live on the coasts, and because you're on the coast, most people on the planet live in cities on the coast. Most of the rest of the population, by the way, live either on big rivers or big lakes. They live near water and ports, but most people live on the coasts, and to get power to them in the shortest distance that can ride out ocean surges and hurricanes has become floating technology. So this one is in Portugal, and we're looking at a floating photovoltaics plant on a river near a dam on the Pondage side, and it's perfect. And there it is. No power poles, no nothing, in terms of the power generation itself. It can't get inundated. I mean, the pondage can flood over. It's still fine. It still floats. So that's one tactic. And of course, in areas where they don't have a lot of land available, very urbanized or very mountainous, it also makes a lot of sense. And here's the other side of it. This is offshore wind, and Europe started it, and Japan, China, Australia are next, and then the United States is coming on a rear fourth off the mid-Atlantic coast and a little bit off the western coast, Northern California, Oregon. And here again, you're floating it. So rather than shipping wind on power lines from North Dakota to New York City, you're 1,800 miles or so. You're shipping it 25 miles from the out in the ocean to a substation that's bunkered so it can't get wet into the electric grid. The EarthSpark is a nonprofit based in D.C., and it has put microgrids in Haiti. It also had the first clean energy store in Los Angeles, Haiti, and then did a microgrid there, and then has another microgrid. And so the whole point is this is a story about earthquake and the aftershocks, and their microgrids are working. So there we go. Another example of blended renewable energy storage solutions near the end user. So this one is a slide talking about a big investment, operational 2022, and it was with 300 megawatts of solar and 150 megawatts of battery storage in New Mexico. And remember, the Southeast gets these super heats usually, which causes wires to sag, transformers to blow. Of course, Texas had a super freeze, and almost the entire grid a few years ago went down, as we mentioned earlier. So there's a huge amount, gigawatts, nuclear power plants worth of storage in Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas to prepare for these superheats and super colds. Best way to stabilize the grid. Here's community solar, Hurricane Ian, no loss of power, Fort Myer area. And community solar, again, has usually donated land from local government, county, city, a campus like a college campus or a hospital campus, or actually closed industrial plants where there's a couple of dollars rent a month. It's near a big power line and goes to feeder lines to those who need it at lower cost and more resiliency. So here's one that does. So to end this, again, resilient strategies are minimum standards for building codes, prioritizing help for low-income communities so they're more vulnerable. Remember, in both cases, the building codes reduce the load to keep the grid more stable. Also, then having less electric need, easier to use smaller battery banks. Low-income communities are in the oldest parts of the grid usually, so those are the ones you want to stabilize. Use of nature, land contours to reduce stormwater and ocean surges, ways to block wind with power lines, and siting distributed energy. Better funding for satellites to get remote sensing and target sensing so we can see in real time in real places where you can ultimately not just respond to emergencies, but also get data to orchestrate solutions to those emergencies. Extreme weather research building on that data. Land use management practices, listening to community needs to look at what kind of issues they have, priorities they have, healthcare, for instance, or the largest manufacturing plant or whatever. And federal recovery assistance to climate resistance planning to merge the two, because climate's going to be more intense, and therefore recovery is going to have to be more responsive. And risk-based pricing on insurance, so we're not rebuilding in floodplains and ocean surge plains or wind tunnel areas where we know we're just going to face it every other year and cost billions of dollars. So there we go. And now for the next show. Thank you for listening to this segment.